Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Crap, that would have made my blood boil, OP. Why the hell would you call someone a creep for watching a sports game with his friend? What a bunch of a-holes. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Get out of your seat? Get out of my seat. I'm a season ticket holder for my local MLB team, currently in my second year, but this happened last year. One lazy Saturday afternoon, I was planning to use the tickets I had for the day. I have two. My friend had to bail last second, so since I'm not that far away from the park, I decided to just go ahead and go by myself. It was too beautiful a day not to. After getting a beer and some nachos, I head down to my section. I see the majority of the row is filled, including my seats. This is definitely not the first time this has happened, and usually if it's kids, I just sit somewhere else nearby and enjoy the game anyway. Last year the team wasn't doing very well and there were more than a few open seats. So I end up sitting in the same row about 5 seats away. Well, 10 minutes later, the rest of the group came back from wherever they were and I was sitting in their seats. One of them says, "Hey, can you move? We were sitting here." Before I could respond or even politely move, their friends who were sitting in my seats chime in and say, "Yeah, we don't know who that is. He's just been sitting there like a creep since you guys left." I get up and say to the kid who asked me to move, "Oh, I'm sorry," and walk over to the one who called me a creep and said, "Get out of my seat." I showed him the ticket, and with little protest, he moved to the end. Then I looked at his friend and said, "You too. These are both mine." For 2 innings, we sat there awkwardly. Best part was when I ordered a hot dog and another beer so they'd have to pass it down to me. Eventually, they moved, but I felt pretty good about how I handled the situation. And our second story. Better check your facts, because people know people. The internet has evolved quite a lot over the years. Some people may remember Usenet groups. I know I do. Used to have a lot of fun reading them. Kind of similar in a way to today's Reddit. In a way, no matter what the subject was, someone would have a Usenet group for it. But unlike today's Reddit, it was strictly text. You could download images, but they would take forever to download and could often be across several different messages. Just one of the messages missing and you wouldn't get the image. Things then improved. Download speed slowly got faster, and then there was IRC that came about. IRC saw the same thing. There was chat room for anything and everything, and if there wasn't, you could clearly create it. If you were to try and watch a video over the internet back then, it could take a couple of hours to download a music video. You get the idea. This is important for the context of the story. I was a writer on a couple of wrestling newsletters during the mid to late 90s. We only published our newsletters online. You could have it emailed to you or go to a website to read it. I think we hosted on GeoCities or Tripod. Both wrestling newsletters were independent of each other, and I used different nicknames on each. One was more a review and preview newsletter where we would post reviews of the most recent shows and events, talk about current feuds, and talk about what we may think will happen in the next big event. The other newsletter was a news and rumors newsletter, with a few fun puzzles, competitions thrown in to keep things interesting. At the time, you had a few big-name wrestling news and rumors websites and a handful of small ones. I was a writer on one of the small ones. Sometimes we'd get news and rumors from the big-name websites, give them credit where appropriate. Sometimes we'd hear things from people in the business. Everyone had their sources of information, and sometimes we'd make an educated guess on possible scenarios based on current trends in the industry. It did get a bit cutthroat at times, with some newsletters claiming that they broke the news first when it had already been published in other newsletters first. And you'd even have some newsletters devote all their time trying to rubbish the other newsletters for publishing false and misleading information. It was rumors. We didn't always get it right. Through a couple of readers of my first wrestling newsletter, I learned of a huge surprise in the works for one organization, which could potentially lead to something happening at a big event coming up. I won't mention the surprise, but it involved a person from another sport. No other wrestling newsletter had reported it, so I included it as a rumor on the second wrestling newsletter. I was instantly rubbished by one of the major wrestling newsletters at the time, publishing a clearly nonsense rumor that would never happen, only for that very same newsletter to publish the exact same rumor 2 or 3 days later, and claimed to be the first ones to publish it. This sort of stuff happened all the time. It didn't bother me at all. Anyway, I happen to have a few wrestlers who actually read my first newsletter. No big names as such, but a couple of lesser-known wrestlers in the big organizations. I knew who they were, but refused to reveal their identities back then and refused to reveal them now. One of them let me know of an unknown fact from a major match a couple of years earlier. It was to do with an injury that happened during part of the match. This fact had never been published anywhere else at the time. I mentioned that I wrote for another wrestling newsletter that dealt with news and rumors and asked if I could repeat the information. The wrestler said sure, but not credit him. So I go ahead and publish the rumor. Straight away, I had another of these smaller wrestling newsletters say that it was nonsense. They said that it was impossible for the match to have continued had the injury happened. They then started a smear campaign on the second newsletter. I was getting spam emails constantly, virus attempts originating from the competition. The competition even went so far as claiming that they had the full story of my wife of 10 years working as a hooker. Don't ask, they were trying to find anything to smear me with. There was more sinister and disgusting stuff, but I won't write it here. Why it got so personal, I don't know. But the funny thing was that at the time I was a 22-year-old single university student, and if I had a wife of 10 years who was working as a hooker, I would have had to marry her when I was 12. But his smear campaign was working. Our readership dropped by nearly 50%. It was time to get some revenge. Although I had no idea just how far the revenge would end up reaching. Firstly, I approached one of the bigger wrestling newsletters. They would often run ads at the bottom or rear of their newsletters for affiliated newsletters. I organized a new affiliation with them, removing an affiliation they had with the competition. Small potatoes. I started promoting the second newsletter heavily on Usenet and some of the wrestling groups, which ultimately led to an increase in our email subscription base, greater than what it was before his smear campaign. This negated any effect that his smear campaign had, but I was hungry for more. I wanted to shove it where the sun don't shine. So I contacted those wrestlers who read my first newsletter. I explained the situation to them, and they were happy to help out. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually I was able to post a link to a 15-second video hosted on a GeoCities webpage as well as on a Wrestling Usenet group, where the wrestler at the center of the injury rumor not only confirmed it, but gave a shortcut to my second newsletter. While it validated me and my information, it still didn't shut the other guy up. Finally, a break. While the guy used an alias for his newsletter, he did actually mention his name a couple of times and where in the U.S. he attended university. Using this information, I was able to get a friend in the U.S. to do some searching for me, attended that very same university, and discovered that the guy had actually completed a journalism degree several years earlier. Further research indicated that he was now working as a reporter for a regional newspaper in the U.S. His wrestling newsletter must just be a hobby. So I decided to send all of the information I had, his smear campaign, etc., to the newspaper office. I don't know what, if anything, it would do, but it was worth a shot. About a month later, I got an email back from the newspaper, thanking me for the information. They discovered that he was using the newspaper system to run the wrestling newsletter, which was against their policy, so they fired him. And because the newspaper was part of a chain of regional newspapers across the U.S., he was going to struggle to find another journalism job. The newsletter got shut down as well because without the newspaper system to run it, the guy had no way of continuing with the newsletter. Side note, I ended up finishing with my newsletters not long after anyway. The first newsletter, as I was just a writer for it, I finished up with it when the owner of the newsletter decided to close it down. He didn't have the time to devote to it due to work commitments. The second one, I started off as just a writer/contributor, then took over their competitions. But eventually took over the whole newsletter. Original owner didn't want to do it anymore. But in the end, I was finishing up at university and had to move on with my career, so I closed it down. And our last story. No, you can't use our yard while we're not home. Our family moved into our home about 2 years ago. We moved in, and our adjacent neighbor has been a nightmare. They're a 40-something couple who have a 5-year-old son. When we first moved in, we wanted a privacy fence for our dogs. Our realtor, our seller's realtor, and our seller said it wouldn't be an issue. The neighbor fought the HOA about it for 3 months, and due to the situation and needing a fence, we made huge concessions and installed a 4-foot fence. It started with them calling the cops one morning when my husband got home from work on a Sunday morning, sat on our backyard deck after a night shift, and drank a beer and hung out with our daughter. They said he was endangering our daughter. Thankfully, the cop understood wanting a beer after a night shift and just popped in and popped out. We had a little Fisher-Price playhouse last summer for her to play in, and they reported it to the HOA. We hung a baby swing off a tree branch. Same thing, call from the HOA. The mom particularly will park her minivan in front of our driveway so husband can't pull in or out of the garage, and wigs out when my husband comes and knocks on her door at 5:30 a.m. to move it. Suffice to say, we've learned our lesson, and when we decided to install a playset, we jumped through the hoops. Last month, we had a landscaper install it. It's essentially a playground in our backyard. We both work essential jobs and no one's home during the day. My husband switched to nights and has watched. The past 2 weeks, her or her husband or her have been letting themselves into our backyard to let their son play for an hour or two twice a day, first through the gate, which we then locked. Now they jump the fence and bring a stepladder to get back over. They always wait for me to leave for work. I'm not sure they see my husband pull in at 6-ish a.m. We bought a security camera that records. My plan is to record them playing in my backyard and putting it on the neighborhood next door and Facebook page. She's active in both and complains about us, including a post about our playground landscaping being insensitive. My other option is to call the cops, but I'm not sure this is the right time to do that. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.